Hi, everybody. And of course, welcome back on this segment with David White. Uh, just to refresh your memory, we talked about UFOs and disclosure. We're going to finish up with the UFOs with David White as a story. He wants to tell us about that. And then we're going to go into other topics in which you'll find interesting too. This is Dave Emmons and Strange Reality Show. And this is segment two. We'll call it with Mr. David White. David White studied at Northwestern University and was lucky enough to study briefly with Dr. J. Allen Hynek. So that shows you he's got some clout with him and some notoriety. He worked with the noted Blue Book Project. I said that better the first segment. And astronomer and UFO researcher. Since then, he's had numerous screenplays, novels, and short stories and authored research papers on UFOs, so he knows what he's talking about on this UFO subject. Pentagon UAP videos, ancient archaeology, megalithic architecture, military and political history, the metaverse, the Ark of the Covenant, and the Knights Templar, and Rene La Chateau.
Rennes Le Chateau.
There you go.
That's
Yeah.
REM.
Okay, I'm getting closer. David is an experiencer, and that's why he knows a lot about UFOs and he likes talking about them. But we're going to be talking about other things too. We're going to try to stay out of the weeds and the politics, but we're going to go into Ukraine and the Russian thing before long because he's doing a lot of writing and scripting for a military paper and also for YouTube. So he's working with them. So that's why he has a lot of research and everything you ask him, it just sticks to him and he can talk about it. Mr. David White, have anything to say in the second opening in the second segment?
Sure. People can find me on Twitter. My handle there is Templar Scribe, all one word, Templar, S as in Sam, Cribe. I comment a lot on the war in Ukraine, a lot of politics, a lot of discussions that you won't see elsewhere. Also, a lot of work on the megalithic architecture side, which we've talked about in the past. But for right now, we're going to stick for a little bit longer with UFOs. So you were asking at the end of the previous hour whether I thought that our government was hiding things like, captured aliens or technology and things like that.
Right.
So there was this time back in 1991. I was living outside of Chicago. I had a friend that lived in Lamont. Lamont is the city just south of Argonne National Laboratory.
Yeah.
Argonne National Laboratory became famous because it was where they took the first nuclear pile that the United States had going, which was during World War II. They had it running under the football bleachers at Stagg Field in Chicago, which was probably not a good place to be running a nuclear experiment in the middle of an urban city. So
Mm-hmm.
they took it out to the southwest to a place called Red Gate Woods. And they had it running there for a few years, and then they figured that wasn't secure enough. So they took it further southwest to just north of Argonne, just north of Lamont in a place called Argonne National Laboratory. And they had it running there for a little while. So Argonne is more or less one of the major military labs, along with Sandia and Brookhaven and a few others. It's surrounded by a donut of forest preserve woods, and because Lamont is the city closest to it, Lamont sort of kind of has a hand in glove relationship where they provide some sort of external police presence beyond the fence that Argonne doesn't necessarily have. There was a gentleman that was the second in command of the Lamont Police Department, a gentleman by the name of Tom Hess. Tom was an exceptional police officer. When there was a tornado back in 91, he was the only person that spotted it as it showed up about a minute before it hit the city. He radioed it in, they turned on the sirens. It took out, I can't remember exactly, but a good portion of the town, 50 or 60 homes. If he hadn't provided that 1 minute warning, dozens of people would have died. So he's been highly promoted and highly rewarded for his excellence. Um, he happened to know my friend who lived in Lamont because they had gone to high school together. And at one point, my friend called and said, "Hey, there's a guy that wants to talk to you about UFOs. Can you come over to my house?" I'm like, "Sure, when?" He goes, "Right now." I'm like, right. It was like, I don't know, 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I can come over." So I come over to his house, and there's a police car sitting in his driveway facing out. And there's a gentleman sitting behind the wheel. And my friend says, go talk to that guy, see what he has to say. His name's Tom Hess. I'm like, okay. So I walk up to him. This officer never looks at me. He never turns off his car. He rolls down the window and he starts talking like he's just recording his thoughts. He doesn't actually say it to me. He just starts talking. And he tells me this story. I can't tell if this story is true or not, but I heard it from the second in command of the Lamont Police Department. Tom Hess winds up going to the FBI and becoming an FBI agent. So he has to have some kind of cojones to be able to go from second in command of the police to an FBI job. So he tells me that earlier, sometime that year, he had been in his patrol car with his partner who was sitting in the passenger seat. They were outside of Lamont a little ways to the southwest when 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, this object started coming down through the clouds. It looked to both of them like it was an airplane on fire, except it was purple. It illuminated the clouds as it came down with purple light until it looked like it was going to land in these woods a mile or so away. And then it went like a bullet due north. And he was stunned. And he finally turned to his partner and said, did you see that? And his partner said, no, and neither did you. And they proceeded to argue about that. It's like, well, we got to report this. And the other guy says, if you want your career to stop, go ahead and report it. But I'm going to claim I didn't say anything. So he went to the police department. He checked in with a watch commander and said, this is what I saw, something coming through the clouds, purple light as it was going through, shot off like a bullet. What did the partner see? The partner says, I was looking out the side window for the whole time. I didn't see a damn thing. So the watch commander says, thank you. We have protocols in place to handle this. We want you to both go home. Don't tell anything to anybody else. Don't talk to your wives. Don't talk to other police officers. Pretend like it didn't happen. There will be some people coming to debrief you later today. You can talk to them, but nobody else. So apparently Tom Hess goes home. Before dawn, like somewhere around 5 a.m., like less than 4 hours later, two guys show up at his door that supposedly came in from Washington. Now, I don't know how you get from Washington to Lamont, Illinois after having gone through O'Hare Airport in 4 hours. My guess is they were from the Chicago area and just said they were from Washington. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Hess says that these two men asked him what he saw. He repeated what he saw, and they said, good. Look, we appreciate the fact that you're working with us. We will expect that you will someday be chief of police of Lamont, which apparently Tom didn't follow that track. And they said, because we want to keep you in our good graces, we're going to share a little information with you. And they supposedly told Mr. Hess, yes, we've been working with aliens for a long while. Tom's words to me were very specific. He said that they told him, we have traded pilots. None of ours have ever returned, and all of theirs have died in captivity. That's what he said. He also said that they told him that they have several of our bases. He didn't say that they shared their bases with these creatures. They didn't say they took them. He just said that they had them. Now, he may have had more information, but that's the way he phrased it to me. He then said that these two men asked him to go see somebody at a university south of Chicago called Governor State University. He goes down there a couple of days later, and he meets with this professor who's doing research. And the professor asks him to write down all the places he's lived in his life. Well, he'd lived in Wisconsin with his parents. He served in the military. He served overseas in Germany. He came back. He lived in Plainfield, Illinois for a while, then Lamont, and then lived for or vacationed up in northern Wisconsin. So this professor writes all this down and checks some databases and says, this is interesting. Everywhere Tom Hess lived in his life, at the time he lived in those places, there were UFO flaps going on in those locations simultaneously. And he asked the professor, what does this mean? And the professor says, we don't know. We just happen to see that some people seem to be in the same place as the UFOs. Whether they're following you or you're following them, we can't figure that out. So that's where this story would have ended if it was not for the fact that about 4 days later, on a perfectly cloudless blue sky day at 10 o'clock in the morning, a single cloud appears over Argonne National Laboratory. And when it dissipates, there's a little silver UFO that goes, and like 40 people see this, including police officers from 3 different departments. So this gets to be news. And a couple of reporters go back to Lamont and check their logbook. And son of a gun, the watch commander actually had a notation that Tom Hess had reported a UFO earlier that week. So they went and talked to Tom Hess, and he said, yeah, I did see something. I don't know what it was. He didn't mention being debriefed by these 2 guys, and he didn't mention anything about being interviewed by a professor down at Governor State University. He later began to talk to other police departments, and every single police department that he talked to in the suburbs of Chicago admitted to him that they had seen UFOs, and they were all told to shut up about it too. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I can't say that for sure this happened, but there was no real reason for Tom Hess to tell me this other than he wanted to unload himself. He wanted to just get that information out there.
How old a guy was he, David?
He was in his mid 40s, I think, at the time, 91, 92.
Oh.
And the fact that it seems like they showed themselves to him and his partner, and it never went public. And like 4 days later, they went, okay, we'll do it in broad daylight then. And they literally created a cloud. They appeared in the cloud, made the cloud disappear, and then flew away so that everybody would know that they were there. That's not our military. That's not our military doing that. I don't know if the guys that showed up that interviewed Tom Hess, if they actually did interview him. I don't know if they worked for the government or who they worked for. I can't even prove that that actually happened. Just like David Grutch that's coming up a lot in UFO circles these days, I don't have any direct proof that this is what happened. I only have the testimony of somebody who saved the lives of other people in Lamont, Illinois when a tornado came through, who was willing to risk his reputation by talking to me about certain things that he saw, and was actually willing to go on the record when reporters tracked him down, yet he didn't report anything to the public until they did track him down.
Is he still alive today, David?
The last I checked, which was some years ago, yes, he was.
Okay.
Can you track him down? Yeah, if you look through the FBI records and look for Officer Tom Hess, you should probably be able to find him. I don't know if he's still living in the Lamont or the Plainfield area, but he might be.
So were these 2 from Washington? They say Washington. Were they men in black?
Well, I mean, there were guys in suits.
Yeah.
I don't think they were the actual kind of men in black, one of which I've seen and which spooked me so much that I stopped studying UFOs for 10 years. I don't think it was one of them.
Okay. What did this guy look like that spooked you? I mean,
oh, okay. So
you seem like a very direct person, you know. And
so this was 1993. I was living in Downers Grove, Illinois. I had a house that had a detached garage, and I was meeting 4 of my partners in a magazine company that were meeting at my house. I let them arrive at my house early. I was somewhere else and I was being delayed. So when I show up, I park in my detached garage and come in through the back door. And these 4 guys, they're all in their early 20s, were beat red. I mean, absolutely like furious, like they just had a fight. And they were pissed off at me. And I'm like, what are you guys worried? What's going on? And they're like, oh yeah, like you don't know. Oh yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that's a great joke. Ha ha. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they said, well, go look out front. I'm like, okay. So I go through the house. I go out to the deck. We had a small, like 15-foot long deck on the front of the house. And we had a 2.5-ish lane street, a normal street in Downers Grove, in front of the house. You could park on the opposite side, but you couldn't park on both sides because there's not enough traffic to go through. So on the opposite side of the street, about a car length down from my house, there's a pristine black Cadillac. And I mean showroom perfect. Shiny like it had just gotten out of the car wash. With, I could tell, red leather, question mark, in the back window where the seat is in the back window, and what appeared to be a violet colored light from the front passenger side window. And in the driver's seat with his window down was a guy who was poking his head out and looking back over his shoulder at me, who appeared to have no hair on his head at all. And
Mm.
as soon as he saw me looking at him, he put the car in drive and drove away without ever taking his eyes off of me, which is what freaked me out because I've driven a lot of cars for a long
Yeah,
time and I wouldn't have been able to do that.
yeah.
And it so scared me that I stopped studying UFOs and I got into ancient archaeology, ancient religions, Sumeria, South America, all those kind of things, which was great because I think you need to have an understanding of just how old civilization is on this planet and the fact that we have been helped in the past to understand that what's going on now with UFOs and aliens and extraterrestrial intelligences is nothing new.
Yeah.
It's just the current version.
They've been involved in our civilization with humans 60,000 years ago, and plus, I've heard scientists say that DNA is over 4.5 billion years old. That means our DNA come from another planet or another galaxy, uh, and was planted here.
I don't know about that. I was doing some research on the planetoid that hit the Earth around 3.6 billion years ago. The planetoid is called Thera.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, whatever was on this Earth was totally vaporized. And it's been 3.6 billion years to now that we've gotten to a point where we're at. It's possible that we do have DNA from off the planet that might have arrived from comets or meteorites or things like that. There are some wonky things in our DNA. Human DNA, especially, is a little. It looks like it's been medically involved with. One
Right.
of the Marian original stories follows one of the female goddesses who tinkered with God DNA to make humans, which is very similar to the Old Testament story. There's actually parallel stories in the Old Testament of the early times. And they parallel because one group of Israelites who recorded the stories in the Old Testament followed Yahweh or Jehovah, and that was the tribe of Dan who lived in the Jerusalem area and looked over the temple. And the other tribes followed what was called the Elohim, which is a plural term meaning the Lord's plural, which is very similar to the family hierarchy that the Sumerians had. And in those two parallel stories, one of them is that women were made from the rib of man. And in the other one, it appears that there was something taken from the gods mixed with the soil of the earth, and humans were created that way. So there's like these parallel stories that seem to follow Sumerian legends because that's where Abraham came from around 1700 BC or so, maybe earlier, from the city of Ur.
Okay.
And he brought those legends with him, and those became the Old Testament stories.
So
Okay,
a lot of folklore goes back a lot way further than what we think. History's not like what we think it is, So
well,
yeah.
the problem with the Bible that most people who don't read anything but the Bible, and I have to urge people who think they know their Bible to read some commentaries on the Bible so you understand how the Bible came to be. The
Mm-hmm.
Old Testament was not written down until the Israelites were in captivity in Babylon around 580 BC. Up until then, all of that was recorded and transmitted orally from father to son, from generation to generation. From before the time of the Israelites being in Egypt until 500 something BC, 580, 570 BC, we're talking more than 1,000 years. Now, some of this was accurately recorded, although because they're playing telephone through the whole thing, it gets a little mismatched. The story of the 10 plagues of Egypt lines up very well with what would have happened if an explosive volcano had occurred in the Mediterranean, which would have first created a seiche, which would have pulled the water away from the Nile Valley and then flooded it back, which would have brought all of this reddish mud mixed with iron into the water, making the flood, which would, because of the flooding, have created a swarm of new bugs, which the frogs would have ate off of, which would have caused an overabundance of frogs, which would have, because of all of this, poisoned a lot of the people drinking the water out of the Nile, which would have caused many people to die, although nobody's important except the firstborn sons of the rich people, so we're only going to talk about them. And then you have all these events that look like this was because of an earthquake or volcano in the Mediterranean. And there happens to be one that happened around I want to say 1460 or so BC, that was also called Thera. Same thing as the planet that hit us, but a different spelling. And Thera was a massive explosion, one of the biggest volcanoes. It took out the Minoan civilization literally overnight, and could be part of the story of the sinking of Atlantis in one
Right.
evening.
Right.
And it also says in the Old Testament that as the Israelites were traveling to Sinai, they were guided by a pillar of fire by day and a pillar of smoke, pillar of fire by night and a pillar of smoke by day, which, if you're looking at Thera many hundreds of miles away, yeah, that's probably what they would have seen, a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke.
Now, you mentioned that people should study the Bible, should study more. There's also, I guess, what they call, a lot of scientists are saying that there's been a lot of Greek language in the Bible. Their interpretation of the languages. There's several languages that are put together with the Bible, and they interpret words differently. And I've heard this from scientists. And also, we getting back to the DNA thing. 20% of our DNA is ours. I've been figuring this kind of out, David. When I was approached by an ET one time, and she said she knew me, I said, "No, you don't know me. I don't know you." But she didn't know my 20%, and which is mine of the DNA. The 80% of the DNA in our body, which the scientists have said over the years, is junk DNA. It doesn't have no function, except it's just there. But
it's not really junk DNA. It's that
bingo,
for the longest while, our scientists didn't know what it did. It
right?
appears that a large portion of this, if not a majority of what's so-called junk DNA, is viruses that have attached themselves to our DNA coding, so that when that virus shows up again, it can't attach and it basically goes away. We're basically immune to that virus again.
Do you
So
believe
our
in the DNA frequency? All of us have different frequencies in our body. DNA has a different frequency. They've actually, located. They said, okay, the DNA has frequencies, and we all are just a massive frequency. And this 80% of junk DNA, I think, could show, if we knew how to read the frequencies of all of our DNA, scientists at this point, we could read past lives in our body. This comes back from thousands of years of DNA in our bodies, and we're nothing but a big recording disc, or we're a recording computer stick, whatever. And we're just a big recording device, and the aliens can read. They're not just reading our 20%, they're reading the other 80%, and which goes back thousands of years. That's how they're tracking us. What do you think
I
about
haven't
that?
done any research on that, so I can't say yes or no to that in any way. It's anything's possible, I suppose.
I just come up with that by piecing together what I've been talking to other scientists and everything about this. And I thought to myself, well, this gal didn't know me. She probably knew the DNA that's in my past lives. And, that's why they follow family DNA. That's why they follow certain people, because they're tracking past lives, where we got started, where our DNA. I imagine an ET that can read all of our DNA frequencies. They can tell you everything that's in us. We're not there yet.
They don't need to read our DNA frequencies. They can read our thoughts. They can read our
Yeah.
theta waves, our alpha waves, and our beta waves. They can.
Right.
I mean, it's like people complain about Bill Gates putting a microchip in the vaccine for COVID. He doesn't need to do that. Your phone, my phone, anybody's phone, it tracks us whether it's on or off all the time. They
Right.
don't need to give us a chip. We carry them around willingly.
Yeah. The technology they have now to track us and what they're doing is
Yeah.
is phenomenal. We don't even know that a
So,
fourth of it.
before we get off the subject, so I was saying, if the U.S. government, if the Pentagon wanted to be honest with the public, with the world, there were 3 or 4 instances that they could talk about that wouldn't violate any classified data. It wouldn't have to reveal any secrets or any hidden things. The first one I mentioned was the Phoenix Lights,
Mm-hmm.
because if they would admit that yes, they were trying to cover up this event by ordering some people in a helicopter to drop flares out to the west and then lie about everything, that would show that they're beginning to come forward. Until you see them come forward with that, don't believe anything else where anybody says the Pentagon or whistleblowers are going to try to give you disclosure, because they're not. They could start with that. Another one would be if they talked about the UFO that showed up over O'Hare in 2006, I think it was, over Concourse C. There has to have been more information than what has trickled out in tiny dribs and drabs about a UFO that showed up at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a regular business day, where dozens of people saw this thing, including people in the control tower, and the people in the control tower were ordered by the FAA not to talk about it. And the only statement that the FAA made the next day was, and this is part and parcel of how they treat this subject, they said officially, it's a shame that we had aliens come millions of light years to visit Chicago only to lose their luggage at O'Hare. That's all they said. They didn't say, well, there might have been. They didn't say, well, we're investigating. They made a joke and they let it drop. That shows that they're not treating this seriously, that they don't want to be honest. If our government, if the Pentagon wanted to be honest, all they'd have to do would be talking about that event, which doesn't involve classifications. It doesn't involve technology. It's just the FAA and O'Hare and being honest about that event. Right. And they won't because they can't be honest about this. Everything that the Pentagon has shown me since 2017 is that they're deliberately trying to confuse us, that they're making it harder for us to know the truth, and they're trying to wear us out by continually giving us people like Louis Elizondo, now David Grush, who we've got evidence, we've got proof. And then what was it with Louis Elizondo? It's been 6 years. No proof.
Right. Now we got this hearing coming up the 26th, and you mentioned it earlier. Is this David Grush and Alessandro going to be in that meeting?
There's no report yet of who's going to be at the meeting. There's no report yet of even where it's going to be held or what Congress members are going to be present. So we don't know. It's very likely that there will be somebody claiming to be a whistleblower who will say, like I told my story about Tom Hess, this guy told me such and such. That's not proof. Unfortunately, that's hearsay. Now, I know this happened, and if you believe me, you will believe that this happened also, but it's not proof of anything. You can, however, go back and check the records of Tom Hess being in Lamont and being interviewed by a couple of journalists, who found out through the watch commander's logbook that he had seen a UFO earlier that week. You could prove all that happened, and you can prove that he was also decorated because he saved a bunch of lives when a tornado came roaring through his town, and he was the only person that spotted it and gave him 60 seconds of warning. All of that checks out. But our government doesn't want to tell us the truth. Our government can't. A perfect example, there's a file called the Family Jewels that was compiled by the CIA back in the 80s because the CIA kept getting blindsided by revelations of things that they had done that were illegal, that could have gotten people put in jail and could have gotten the CIA's charter revoked, because there are certain things they can and can't do, and they were just pretty much doing whatever they wanted. So the head of the CIA decided, I don't want to be blindsided in these congressional hearings anymore. I want a list on my desk compiled by CIA officers that tells me everything we did illegally that I need to know about. So they put together this list, which they nicknamed the Family Jewels. And they listed the times we tried to kill Castro, the times we dosed a French town with LSD in their water supply without asking permission and without telling anybody. That would bring about a war if this was done by like Germany in World War II or the Russians, and a bunch of other horrible, awful, nasty, terrible things.
Well, they did it in St. Louis too, David. They did it in St. Louis back in the 50s. They poisoned a lot of the water there, and they were testing it out. They've done things to the public that they have never come across with, David.
Right. So this document has now been declassified except for Family Jewel number 1. And on the page, you can go to the CIA website where they have all their documents. You can download for free right off the website. You can see in this report that they have redacted what appears to be 4 or 5 lines. And it's number 1 in this list. Now, and there's also 2 full pages of descriptions for what number 1 is. That's completely redacted, completely blacked out. Now, there are only 2 subjects that the CIA does not talk about in this whole document: the Kennedy assassination and UFOs. And I'm betting that it's not UFOs because it'll take a lot more than 2 pages to describe all the things that the CIA
Yeah.
has been doing with UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably that CIA members were involved with the Kennedy assassination, and we still can't talk about that 60 years later.
Well, Robert Kennedy Jr. has been talking about it. Have you listened to
Robert
him?
Kennedy Jr., may I just be one of the many people who say he's an idiot?
Really?
Sorry, he's a bought and paid for idiot. He's being run by Roger Stone as a Republican alternative to any Democrat. He's designed to pull voters away. He's getting hammered currently because he has made the claim that the coronavirus was biologically engineered to spare Jewish people. And there is no scientific or medical evidence of that. He's
Not
getting
that, yeah.
hammered because of that. He basically, there are a lot of people that appear to want to push Russian propaganda. If you look back, there's a website called globalresearch.ca, which means it's a Canadian website. Global Research was paid for by the same oligarchs that were involved in the 2016 efforts to subvert the election by paying people on Facebook to do horrible, awful things. Like they had a riot in Texas because this oligarch paid for 2 different groups on Facebook to claim that they were going to be at this one town in Texas. One was like pro democracy, one was pro totalitarianism. They both shut up and had a fight. It was paid for by the same guy just to have people fighting in Texas.
Right.
This same oligarch was responsible for money behind the Brexit initiative, which broke England off of the European Union because Russia wants disunion. They want craziness going on in Europe as they do in America. So this same oligarch paid globalresearch.ca, and we know this now because NATO actually tracked this money from the oligarchs to this website. This website was one of the very first that started promoting all of the lies and hoaxes about the coronavirus and then the vaccine. They were the ones that were promoting the idea that the 5G bandwidth signal was what was causing coronavirus, which is patently absurd because it was happening in places like Iran, which didn't have 5G. And they still
Right.
got huge spikes of corona cases without any 5G. So it had nothing to do with that. And
Yeah.
this one website was pointing out a lot of this information because the Russians were telling them to, because it's in Russia's best interest for us to work against and fight against each other.
Yeah, we're kind of gliding into these other topics, and I've been wanting to get you into these other topics because you know quite a bit about them. Okay, we're talking about disinformation and misinformation about the disclosure and UFOs and ETs and everything. Now let's get into. Let me start off with something really weird. It's the reptilians underground that are actually involved in people disappearing. I don't want to get too deep in that topic, but you know what I'm talking about. And there's a new movie out. It's called Freedom, and you had mentioned something about that a while ago, and I don't know if you want to mention that on the air or not, about freedom and
just like globalresearch.ca and a bunch of other sources. It appears to have been financed by Russian oligarchs. It's designed to make us fear and doubt our political leaders on both sides. It's not very credible at all. It's like the 100 Mules or the 1,000 Mules or whatever it is. That one has been disproven as well. Yet some people, like with the X-Files poster, they want to believe.
mm-hmm.
So this feeds into their belief system that there has to be some great evil going on because that explains things that otherwise I can't understand.
Caviezel, the main star of it, and his producer, they were talking about where they got the funds. They said they got the funds from an oligarch, a rich billionaire from Mexico. He lives in Mexico City, and he's very rich. He's one of the wealthiest men in the world, and he's the one who funded a lot of this movie. Because they have people and children disappearing. Ukraine has people disappearing. The U.S. has people disappearing.
Okay,
And
hold on.
Okay.
Before you go any further,
Okay.
Ukraine doesn't have people disappearing. Ukraine has people being kidnapped and taken to Russia. They're not disappearing. They're being kidnapped. That's the actual first thing that Putin has been charged with a war crime for taking children from Ukraine and bringing them to other places in Russia and teaching them to be Russians. He's actually been accused or charged with a war crime for that. That's not anything like what's going on with these other situations. There's a freaking war going on there right now, and maybe as many as 100,000 civilians have died. This
Right.
has nothing to do with reptilians. This has nothing to do with any of these other conspiracy theories. This is a war, and Russia is doing it as illegally and as violently and as criminally as they possibly can.
I know you don't think much about Trump, but what Trump said last night in the town hall, he said there's been hundreds of thousands of people killed and displaced in Ukraine. He said they're not giving us the right numbers. Trump said that. Do you believe him when he says that?
Trump said a hurricane hit Alabama. And when the map that he was given showed him that it wasn't going to hit Alabama, he took a black Sharpie and circled part of Alabama so he could be right. Trump lies more than he tells the truth. I'm sorry, sometimes he tells the truth, but with 30,000 absolutely verified lies that he told in less than 4 years, I cannot believe a word he says. Now, that being
Could this
said,
go on both sides of the aisle? I mean,
no, no, no,
let's take
no,
a look at Biden. You know, can we believe what he says? No,
Biden makes mistakes. Biden is 80 years old. He's a grandpa. He
he's
makes mistakes.
senile. Yeah, he's very
No,
senile.
no, I did not say senile.
I did.
I know you. And I don't want to get into the politics of this, but I
No,
guarantee you,
did
he
you
is.
see how he performed with the premier of Israel yesterday? He almost fell asleep talking.
Well, like I said, he's 80 years old.
Yeah.
However, when his term is over, people are going to look back and be amazed at how many things his administration got done. You have to remember, the United States government is not one person. It's not one guy driving a bus full of
No,
300
there's
million.
yeah.
He's the top of the pyramid, but he has hired good people to get things done. And he's been willing to work across the aisle to get Republicans on board to get some of these issues passed. I'm just going to point to one thing that he's done. He had the Inflation Reduction Act, which Republicans were dead set against. Our inflation is now under 2.9%. No
Um,
other
yeah, but
company has that.
the people on the street, just like me, I go to the grocery store. It's twice as much as it used to be, David. I mean,
And
it
that's because
hasn't
of
gone up.
corporate greed. It
Yeah.
has nothing more to do than that. If you look at all of these companies that have made record profits since COVID started, it's because they're greedy, pardon my French, bastards. And they want more money. And they know that they can put it on us because our Congress won't stop them from doing that. The Democrats offered laws that would stop, for example, price gouging at the gas pump, and the Republicans turned them down 100%. The Democrats and Biden put together an infrastructure package that helped every single state. Every Republican voted against it. And when it gets passed, all of a sudden the Republicans take credit for the money that's coming into their state. They voted against this package, yet they're perfectly willing to accept credit for money that comes in that they actively tried to stop.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be funny here. You talk about infrastructure, in Illinois and Missouri, I go to St. Louis. I have to drive about 10 miles an hour because there's so many deep ruts and holes that you can almost lose your front end of your car in these ruts. And where's the infrastructure? But
Well,
let's
haven't been able to pay for it in the past. Now some of that money is finally getting down to the states. And you have to remember, too, that the states have the ability to redirect some of this money into other areas. One of the biggest stories that's come out is that some of the COVID funds that were supposed to go to states to do certain things to help the people to get through this medical emergency, they diverted COVID funds to pay for this and to pay for that and pay for something
well,
else.
they said a lot of it's missing and they don't even know where it went.
Well, a lot of the business loans did. Now, here's another perfect example of how, and we're going to, let's back away from politics for a little bit.
Okay, yeah,
Just,
I want to get you into the Ukraine thing that you're writing about, and that would be
okay,
on
so,
YouTube. You're writing about Ukraine and Russia, and you're doing these articles. Yeah,
right.
with this, we can. Yeah, we're got. I want you to tell me about some of your expertise in this YouTube thing. Politics, you and I, we agree with. I mean, a lot of times we're not fighting and fussing, but there's a lot of people who really are taking it at heart. I'm saying all politicians are on the take. I'm sorry. you know.
Well, I can't say that all politicians are that way because you can't get 100% of anybody to do all the exact same thing. I think there are quite a few politicians that are in it for their own personal
Yes, yes.
self-aggrandizement. But there are people in Congress, both the Senate and the House, that are honestly trying to help their constituents, that want to make the world a better place for their friends.
And
For
most
their
of them are still poor. Most of them don't have money. The ones that are honest,
yeah,
basically.
yeah. All right, so Ukraine.
Yeah,
Okay, so
let's get on that. Yeah, let's go to you.
there's a guy on YouTube called and I should give a shout out. So the two channels that I do writing for are infographics and the military channel. There's a guy on YouTube called the Russian Dude, who starts every one of his daily Ukraine updates with ridiculous Russian propaganda. And he says it just like that. So he points out the very first thing he does is the propaganda that the Russians are spilling. And basically, anything that comes out of Russia these days, I can't trust because they
No.
just don't tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Ukraine, on the other hand, has, because of their desire to keep their plans secret, they don't lie so much as they just don't share what's going on. There are some neutral observers. There's a company from one of the low countries, one of the Baltic countries, called Oryx, Oryx, who have tracked equipment losses that are only verifiable, that they can verify through serial number or wreckage on the device, or they have videos, footage of when and where this happened. They've been tracking the losses, and the Ukrainian losses are far below the Russian losses. We now know that the Russians have lost more than half of their main battle tanks that were available before the war. It is stunning how much they've lost. And even though Ukraine doesn't have a navy, they've sunk 18 Russian ships, including the Moskva, which was the flagship of the Russian fleet.
Right. We all heard
and a couple
that.
other ships. The Ukrainians are fighting their hearts out. They're doing whatever they can to protect their country. And anybody in America who thinks that we're wasting money going there doesn't understand the situation. It's absolutely clear that if Russia could take Ukraine, they would go to Moldova next, and then they would try to take Poland, and they would keep going until they had as many of their former Union of Soviet Socialist Republics portions back in their hands. We know this for a fact because when Lukashenko, the dictator of Belarus, was giving a press conference early last year about the war, he had a map that was prepared for him that showed how they were going to move through Ukraine, and it showed how they were going to move in Moldova too, because he was an idiot, I guess, and wanted to show.
We all believe that, and yeah, and the NATO nations also believe that, and they're afraid. Now,
no,
I heard.
Hold on. NATO is not afraid. NATO is perfectly willing to kick Russia's ass, but they don't want to start a nuclear war. So they've tried very hard to keep NATO troops out of this. There are limited numbers of NATO troops in Ukraine at embassies, and there are lots of NATO troops training Ukrainians in NATO countries. There is no evidence that I've seen that there are official NATO troops in Ukraine, and NATO is definitely able to beat the crap out of Russia anytime they wanted to without using nukes.
Well, yeah, we see a weak military. The Russians have a weak military. We never knew that, but now we know. What about the corruption that was in? Yeah,
possibly we knew this before, and we were perfectly willing to let them appear to be the number 2 military in the world because, like I said, the Pentagon likes to get funded, and they want to get funded more if our enemies appear strong.
What
that doesn't mean, by the way, that we should take China for granted. China would love to take over the world.
Yes.
However, at this point, China thinks they can do it diplomatically and economically, and they don't have to do it militarily. There's a really intelligent guy that you can find all over Twitter called Peter, I want to say it's Vril, but I'm sure that that's not correct because you mentioned Vril earlier. Peter Thiel, that's his name. And he points out very accurately, because I've done research to support this, that China gets 70 to 75% of all of its natural gas and oil from outside of the country. They also get 75% of their food from outside of their country. They only make 25% of their food. And out of all of that oil and natural gas that they get, a lot of that helps contribute to creating the fertilizer to grow the minimal 25% that they do grow.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Thiel has pointed out that as soon as a war starts with China, the clock starts ticking. Within 3 months, they will run out of oil. They will no longer have trucks and cars unless they have electric ones. And some of their power plants that run off of natural gas, they're going to shut down too. And within 3 months of that, 6 months total, they're going to start having massive famines. We're talking hundreds of millions of people will die
What
because
about
China
us?
cannot support itself without the global economy that has allowed it to get to where it is now.
So the U.S. is more independent. We can survive.
He points out that the United States, more than almost any other country, has enough land to grow our own crops. We have enough oil. We're an exporter of oil. We're not an importer of oil.
Mm-hmm.
That we can take care of ourselves with our own coal reserves, our own natural gas, our own oil reserves, our own food. The only thing we don't really have a lot of are the rare metals that we need to make some advanced devices like phones and computer chips.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to find other sources of that because China is beginning to turn the nozzle off on that ability because they are trying to corner the market on rare metals.
Right.
So
I admire Ukraine, David. I like you said a while ago, they're fighting tooth and nail to keep their country, and I admire what the people are going through, and they're holding up and they're fighting. But I've heard other stories too, that Lewinsky and some of the others, there was a hint of corruption. Was there ever any corruption within their government?
well, yeah, because they were a former Soviet republic. Any former Soviet republic had levels of corruption.
Yeah.
In order for them to get into the European Union, and in order to get into NATO, they have to pass certain tests. In order to get into the EU, there are literally 10,000 items that they have to check off their item list, which is why Turkey can't get into the EU because a lot of them are about democracy and having an independent judiciary that tracks down crime and corruption.
Right.
And Ukraine is on its way to rooting that out. They have arrested people that have been accused and found guilty of corruption. Turkey, less so. And one of the reasons that I think Turkey was finally willing to remove its obstruction to Sweden joining NATO is because Turkey wants to restart its admission into the EU without having to go through all those 10,000 pages of laws and restrictions that they have to go through. So if they give them Sweden, maybe they can get a little bit of leeway on getting into the EU on some of these other things. Is there corruption? Yeah. Is there corruption in the United States? Sure. Is there corruption in England? Sure. Yeah. Corruption in China? Corruption in China is a huge problem.
Right. And you talk about human rights issues in China and also India. We're looking at that. That's I mean, around the world we have corruption everywhere, like you said, and here in the U.S. we shouldn't have the corruption, but we do. And I guess when I said when all the politicians are on the table, I shouldn't say all. I'll back off and say not all. That's an angry statement, David. I should never make a statement in anger because I don't trust the politicians.
We're emotional creatures. I understand. In America, we have legalized corruption. We have dark money interests that can donate money, unlimited amounts from corporations into campaigns where the politicians can then keep the money for themselves if they wish. The Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema claimed that she was going to be, a senator for the people, and she got a $500,000 donation from a big pharmaceutical company, and the next day, within 24 hours, she voted to allow the pharmaceutical companies to make tons more money and not have their products regulated under, prices that we can afford. So yeah, they're bought and paid for in an open forum. It's not.
Well, it's just like the Pelosi's also. They went and voted. They brought this on the table. What is it, about trading or something of stocks and trading that they got involved in, and they got under the bar.
Every politician who has information on something that will affect stock prices should recuse themselves from either those meetings and that information, or they should divest themselves and put whatever their holdings are in a private blind trust so that they don't have any control over what's being bought and sold. If we want to have an honest and fair country, we need to do those two things. We need to remove dark money interests on both sides from going to politicians, and the politicians need to take all of their holdings and put it into a blind trust while they're in office. It's interesting to note that Trump did neither of those things. And Trump promised he was going to do that and didn't. So let's back away from politics again and get back into Ukraine.
Okay,
So
I want to talk to you. I mean, I think it's you've done a good job and you're writing for YouTube and also the military. What are the latest, greatest stories that you've come up with and that you put into YouTube or wrote, David?
There's one that I want to write that I haven't gotten my YouTube people to let me write yet. So I'm thinking about doing it on my own. There's a gentleman on Twitter who is a much better, much deeper researcher than I, who last year in August pointed out that one of Putin's top 3 advisors at that time was a guy who claimed that he had invented a device to measure the noosphere. Now, the noosphere is this new concept that suggests that there is some sort of like almost biologically aware sentience that connects all of our technological devices, and that you can see, according to some researchers, that there is an appearance of an awareness of an event before an event happens. Oh. For example, before 9/11, there are people that are talking about the World Trade Center buildings being attacked or terrorists in airplanes or things like that. They say that some of those things affect popular shows like The Simpsons, talking about Donald Trump being elected president before he even announced he was running for president.
Yeah, The Simpsons. Yeah.
Okay, so the noosphere suggests that there is a consciousness involved in our technology that can not just predict the future, but is somehow involved in that. So this guy, who was like Putin's 3rd highest advisor, was like, he claimed he had invented some device that could see this, that could measure this. It's probably not true. It's probably just, some sham or hoax. However, he had Putin's ear, and he began to suggest the idea that this new level of humanity would only be reached after the end of a major cataclysm, like a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And that when that once happened, then we could expect, the Messiah to return and everything is going to be hunky-dory and will be brought out of the wreckage because we're in a new phase of humanity, something similar to the whole Mayan, we're leaving the old age and entering into the new age back in 2012, December 21st, which didn't happen. Okay. The problem is when you've got a guy like that who has Putin's ear and he's whispering, hey, you could be bringing back the savior of the earth. All you got to do is launch a few dozen nukes. That's terrifying. That's really terrifying. And
do you think Putin you think Putin is capable of doing that? Does he have all his senses? That's what a lot of people wonder.
Well, okay. Then the next question is, which Putin are you talking about? Are you talking about the original guy from 1991 who was working in St. Petersburg, who doesn't look like the guy today? Are you talking about the one who was out shaking hands in the crowds after the aborted rebellion back in June, who isn't the Putin that sits behind a 50-foot-long desk because he doesn't want to be near anybody, even his closest advisors? It's possible that there are 3 or 4 Putins right now, and there have been other ones in the past. There has been a report that Putin's wife, who is estranged from him, claims that he's not the guy she married.
Wow. Now this gets into also that our presidents have doubles. Biden has doubles. They've been talking about this. David, do you know this? Where'd you get this information on Putin?
Oh, it's been reported by numerous military and Western analysts. They actually have, you can look on Google and find a list of all the different Putins and how they look different. They have different earlobes, they have different noses, they have different eyebrow ridges. You can tell that they're different. I don't know about Biden having a double. I don't know about anybody else, but I can see that with Putin, there appears to be multiple people playing him. For example, hold on. Right after this abortive coup back on June 24th, they had a live session a couple of days later that was sort of like a proof of life video to show that Putin was still alive. They did it live from one of his offices while they had a second live presentation of him laying wreaths, laying flowers at a veterans monument. Both of them were live at the same time, and TASS, the Russian uh, news station owned by the government, run by the government, was willing to show that he's in two places at the same time. There are also piece of evidence that he will broadcast from what is his bunker, except he's got two of these because in one bunker there's an air vent right here, and in the other one the air vent's down here. So they duplicated these bunkers so that they would look like they were the same room, but they missed one small detail.
Yeah, I heard
So
that these dark operations people they make clones. We're talking about reptilian run, Illuminati and Cabal. They make these clones out of the humans. They do human clones. And are these the doubles that we're talking about, like movie stars? I saw a video on Britney Spears dancing weird and awkward, and they said that's her clone. That's not her. So
no, that's called drugs and alcohol.
yeah.
Or to be fair to Britney Spears, um, dancing in public in a hot stage can be very tiring, and you could like wear yourself out. It could be easily that too. You got to go with Occam's razor on this. You got to go with what's the most logical, easily explainable answer. You don't need clones if you have a guy who, for 50,000 a year, will go out into a crowd and shake hands and pretend to be Vladimir Putin.
Bingo. Okay, we're closing. Can you imagine this hour went by really fast? We're closing in the final minute. I want you to tell people where they can find your writings and your work, David, and tell them. I think you said something a while ago about your Twitter. Could you repeat that again and tell people?
My Twitter handle is Templar Scribe, all one word, Templar, S as in Sam, Cribe. You can DM me there if you'd like. You can also go to the website vocal.media and look for David White. There's two of them there. One of them has one story. The other one has like 27 stories. I'm the guy with the 27 stories. Okay. So some of my short stories are there. You can also find some other items that I've posted on there. I've got a couple of different websites with some of my other screenplays and short stories on, but those two you can get to me pretty easily that way.
David White, yes. I'll probably put that in the narrative on this show too. So that's why I'm writing things down. I write little notes down. I'm not trying to avoid talking or looking in the eye or anything, but I'm writing notes about what you're saying about because I gotta write this narrative, and I want to make it right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking around with us. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll probably have more with David White in the future. I know he's writing. I want to keep up with what he's doing. We always get together it seems like every 3 months to do a new show. You've been listening to David White, and look him up. This is the Dave Emmons Show with a strange reality, and you'll see me and all my guests on Facebook all the time. I have 8 other, I guess, projects or things that I sent out to distribute the videos to. So I want to thank everybody. You've been listening to David White. Great guest. Thank you so much, David. And we'll end the show with that. And God bless everybody in this world, actually. Bye-bye.
Be happy and be safe.
Yeah, there you go.